Welcome everybody to part two of our two-part series on the AMPK pathway. Before we get going, just a couple of housekeeping notes. I definitely have a pad of paper and a pen handy. There's going to be, as the part two of, hopefully everybody's watched part one from last week, but part two is going to have the solutions to all the problems created by an ineffective AMPK pathway. And also, this is a little bit more unusual for the membership coaching calls, because usually I focus on one subject, but this was just too much information to throw into one training session. So I divided up into two and basically showed you everything going on last week and what the problems could be and what they lead into and how much more we've learned about blood sugar and how much deeper you can actually go with this. And today we'll get into more of, a little bit of review at first, and then we'll talk about symptoms, body signs, and then what you can actually do to overcome this significant issue for so many people. And so with the review first, what I want to bring up here one second is when we're talking about the AMPK pathway, I want you to remember that the net effects that this has on your tissue. So when the AMPK pathway is not working correctly, remember this affects your hypothalamus, which can deplete, which can have a negative impact on your appetite, drive cravings and desires for more food. This AMPK pathway can actually have a direct impact on your pancreas and beta cells, which would affect blood sugar regulation as well as insulin secretion. This can definitely have an effect on your muscle tissue, which can leave you with a very poor energy, feeling fatigued on a regular basis. And the AMP pathway can also affect adipose tissue and fatty acid metabolism, to where you just don't metabolize fats very well anymore. And the end result of this, could lead to beginning with weight gain, to obesity, to insulin resistance, to poor glucose metabolism, poor fat metabolism, which then leads you even more depletion, and just really some challenges with weight management overall. And when we're looking at this is the other key point as far as a review, to recognize what happens when the glucose levels are off. And this ties directly, and I want you to remember this from last time, this directly ties into inflammation in your body as well. And when you have this chronic inflammation, it's going to drive up glucose levels. Now, one of the pathways this affects, it affects your hypothalamus and creates a hypothalamic leptin resistance. So basically what happens is your leptin levels go up, your appetite goes up, and your hypothalamus no longer has the ability to regulate these. The other pathway tied into hormones, when the glucose levels are up, it rises, it creates a rise in cortisol, creates a rise in other hormones. This leads to a functional pH acidosis, an electrolyte imbalance, and further hormone imbalance as well. This can also lead into microglia activation, which basically is a precursor to neurodegeneration. And we all know that everybody wants to live a life free of dementia, Alzheimer's, and any kind of neurodegenerative effect. But this inflammatory activation also stimulates and leads to intestinal permeability. This intestinal permeability, you may have heard me talk about it from that perspective, or refer to as leaky gut. That ends up leading to dysbiosis, which is bacterial imbalance in your gastrointestinal system. And then, interestingly enough, that dysbiosis then leads to challenges in the liver, where there's a hepatic biotransformation impairment. So your body has a tough time going through a phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification pathway to properly remove poisons and toxins from your body. And then the big one is also this raise in glucose leads to insulin receptor resistance. This also leads to insulin surges. And then when there's insulin surges, and this is a good review from last week, insulin surges in men creates an increase in something called aromatase, which typically leads to testosterone being converted into estrogen. But for women, very often, the same insulin surges can actually create an increase in lyase, which then can actually increase testosterone. And interestingly enough, both the excess estrogen in men and the excess testosterone in women also are impacted by that hepatic biotransformation impairment that I mentioned that goes down the path with the dysbiosis, with the bacterial imbalance. So in essence, and I don't expect you to really understand all of this very deeply and comprehensively, but as you could tell by everything I'm going through here, when there's a combination of this chronic inflammation and the glucose levels going up, and all driven by this poor function of the AMPK pathway, this makes your health and your life a disaster on so many levels. It's really like the physiological web of excess glucose in your body. And what this really does, and it's so much more, and I talked about this last week, it's so much more than diet and exercise and just making sure that you're eating right and getting out moving your body. It gets into deeper levels because you're getting into hormone imbalance, you're getting into the chronic inflammation driving the gut issues, you're getting into that leading to the dysbiosis, then you're getting that into leading into the liver issues, and then all of this leading in potentially into neurodegeneration, the hypothalamic issues with raising leptin, and you can't control your appetite, as well as the shifts hormonally as far as estrogen or testosterone. So this is a big challenge for a lot of people, and where I really feel that I really feel blessed to be able to have learned of this information, to take it another step further for, as an example, clients that I work with at Depke Wellness, is this understanding this AMPK pathway really helps that small percentage of people who it seems like no matter what you do, you just can't get better. You just can't recover. So I wanted to do that little bit of a review first before we get into some of the other aspects today. Right now, the one thing that I want to bring up is tied into how do you know if this is an issue for you? And some of the bigger things, like one of the telltale signs that the AMPK pathway is not working well, is getting tired after meals. Where you eat a meal and you really should, if you're eating a quality meal, you should expect to be energized from the meal. But if you're consistently getting tired after meals, or even if this happens to you on some occasions, the tired after meals is one of those symptoms that you could pay attention to. Now, of course, you could pay attention to the other symptoms that we had mentioned earlier, with the bigger picture of all this. If there's problems with detoxification, if there's deeper gut issues, if there's hormonal imbalance, if you're craving foods on a regular basis, if you feel like your mind isn't working as sharp as it used to, where you could be dealing with some neurodegeneration yourself, or down that pathway of excess estrogen for men or excess testosterone for women. And even from a symptom standpoint with that, with men with excess estrogen tend to get a little soft around the midsection and get a lot more fleshy tissue on their breast area. And for women with excess testosterone tend to actually start potentially growing some facial hair that would not be typically normal for you. Now, some other things, because not everybody is really aware at how they feel after eating meals. There's just, and I'm not going to try to explain why, but there's a different level of awareness from one person to the next. And I think there's some ties into that of genetic predispositions as far as strengths or weaknesses, because typically people have some genetic weaknesses, are a little bit more aware of slight changes, whereas somebody with a stronger constitution tend to not have that same awareness. So that could be one of the factors. So other things that you could do is you could pay attention to some body signs. Number one, you could look at your tongue. If you stick out your tongue, and if you notice on the outer edge of your tongue when you stick your tongue out, if there's something that I would refer to as scallops, but you might just think of them as teeth marks, which is really what they are. You see, because your tongue is designed to fit perfectly in the bed of your mouth. Now, if your tongue becomes inflamed, it pushes up against the teeth as it's resting in your mouth. But then when you stick out your tongue, you'll see where the tongue was pushing up against the teeth, and those are the scallops. Those are the teeth marks. Now, if you have scallops or these teeth marks on the sides of your tongue, that's a telltale sign for insulin resistance. So that's a part of that pathway of the AMPK failing on you. Now, other things you could pay attention to, you can take a picture, somebody could take a picture of the back of your neck. And if there's a crease in the back of your neck with a little bit of, maybe even to an extreme, it might have a little discoloration of the skin around it. But if you see the neck crease in the lower portion of the neck right here, that's also another sign of challenges with glucose and insulin. And yeah, so basically, pay attention to how do you feel after meals. Pay attention to your tongue. Do you recognize the teeth marks? And pay attention if you've got a crease in the back of the neck. And by all means, pay attention to all the other symptoms we've talked about. And I'll review those once more in case you were trying to write them down earlier and weren't able to keep up with as I was talking. So pay attention to the drive up of leptin to where your appetite is really high all the time. Pay attention to if there's any signs of neurodegeneration where you just can't think as sharply or memorize as easily as you did in the past. Pay attention to if you feel like you just can't get rid of toxins. And I've heard clients say this, I just feel toxic, right? And also for males, pay attention to if you're getting more fleshy tissue around the chest and the breast area. And for females, if you have symptoms of excess testosterone, which could be actually some unwanted hair growth as well. These are all symptoms and what you're really looking for to help you understand if the AMP pathway is an issue for you. And now, if you find that this is an issue and you find that these are creating some challenges for you, there's some different levels of benefit that you can provide for yourself. And what I always think about this, down this pathway, because I like to start small and work up. I don't like to just jump into these type of protocols that would be, excuse me one second, let me take care of that light there. There we go. I don't like to jump into full protocols because sometimes you could take care of things with less rather than more. So typically when I have clients that have these type of symptoms that we're talking about today, I usually start with 2 supplements. That one is called glycin. I'll go over what that is in a bit. And the other is Enterovite. These 2 in and by themselves could actually, if you don't have a really deep chronic issue with the AMPK pathway, these 2 supplements in and by themselves could really create a significant shift for you. Now, the one which is glycin is just really designed to help actually regulate blood sugar better. Now, what's interesting with glycin is a combination of different nutrients that all have a positive impact on blood sugar regulation. So, and too much of a list to go down through all of this, but I'll just give you some of the more common. Vitamin E, multiple different types of B vitamins, almost every B vitamin that you've heard of, magnesium, zinc, selenium, manganese, chromium, alpha lipoic acid, L-carnitine, just really to name a few of the different nutrients that are essential for breaking down glucose properly, or breaking your food down, and to utilize your glucose properly for supporting sugar metabolism and the utilization of this. So the general recommendations that I have with my clients, I typically have them start by taking 2 of the glycin before meals. All right, and then you just pay attention to, so let me back this up. If you're the person who you have those symptoms to where when you, after you eat a meal, you typically get a little tired or lethargic, or you have a dip in energy. Remember, after you're finishing a meal, you should have an increase in energy, not a dip. And so I'll usually have my clients start with just taking 2 of the glycin and then pay attention to how you feel. right? If you notice with 2-glycine, you're still feeling that same dip, well, then the next time you eat a meal, take 3 and continue with that. And usually at a maximum of 4 before most people recognize the difference. But yeah, and some people can actually find a benefit with as low as just taking 1. But I usually find that 2 is necessary, but sometimes 3 or 4 are necessary. And again, the gauge that you're really paying attention to is how are you feeling after your meal? Do you take that shift from being a little tired and fatigued after your meals into being more energetic, or at least at minimum a neutral feeling rather than a depletion? And now the other supplement that I usually use right at the beginning with this is because this faulty AMPK pathway is always tied into an inflammatory response. And the biggest challenge for most people with this inflammation is inflammation in the gastrointestinal system, right? Because when you're inflamed, I mean, most of the inflammatory triggers are also going to be going down the pathway of your digestive system. So if you're eating foods that you're sensitive to, or eating, basically the SAD diet, which is the acronym for the standard American diet, high in sugar and processed foods, or if there's pathogens you're dealing with, like there's all these different things that are tied into the gastrointestinal system. So it's extremely common, almost 100%, to where if you have a faulty AMPK pathway, usually there's some damage to the gastrointestinal system as well due to this chronic inflammation. So the enterovite, which is basically it's something called butyric acid. And butyric acid, or butyrate, depending on how you're going to say this, is very supportive for rebuilding and establishing a healthy gut lining. So generally speaking, I usually start people at least with 2 of these twice per day, sometimes more, sometimes up to 4, a couple of times a day, depending on the depth at which you're dealing with this issue. And that is usually a great starting point. Because for some people, just utilizing the 2 of those can create the shift, but it depends on the depth and the chronic aspect of where your AMPK pathway really is. Now, for those who have to go down deeper levels, I use something called glycoberine or glycoberine MX. Now, I typically like to use the glycoberine. It's a little bit more aggressive, and it's actually called glycoberine active. And the glycoberine active is basically berberine, with the recognition that berberine is strictly from a supplement perspective, is probably better at regulating blood sugar than really most pharmaceutical drugs. Now, as far as supporting your own blood sugar regulation. Now, for some people, though, an aggressive level of berberine is just too disruptive. And that's where, for some people, you use what's called the glycoberberine, excuse me, the glycoberberine MX. So the difference with these is the glycoberberine active has 500 milligrams of berberine, whereas the glycoberine MX only has 250 milligrams. But to still be able to create that support that you're looking for from a blood sugar perspective, instead of just using the berberine and the MX formula, there's also a proprietary blend of burdock extract, alpha lipoic acid complex, as well as rose hips, which all have been shown to also be supportive for the AMPK pathway. So it really depends on the person. Some people you can be far more aggressive with, and you can go right down the pathway with the glycoberine active, or for some people who have to take a more gentle route, you go with the glycoberine MX. And the other thing that's important with this entire pathway is also supporting your omega-3 fatty acids. In my clinic, and even personally in my house, the only omega-3s that we typically use are krill oil. I actually use the keto krill, which is krill is a crustacean, and it's a very potent omega-3 fatty acid because it's got naturally contains phospholipids, which makes it both water and fat soluble. So the absorption rate of that is much higher. I use the keto krill because of a family history of neurodegenerative issues, whereas my wife uses either the krill or the regular krill or krill for women, also mostly for that omega-3 perspective. Now, for people with very deep issues with this AMPK pathway, where you're also dealing with the deeper level of the chronic inflammatory disorder, sometimes we have to also move into the use of resveratrol and turmeric. Now, what these are, though, is the resveratrol is a liquid emulsified form of resveratrol, and the turmeric is a liquid emulsified form of turmeric. Now, interesting with both of these, as these are liquid emulsified forms, when you compare a liquid emulsified form of a supplement as compared to a capsulated form, the liquid emulsified forms are going to be approximately 16 times more efficient in your body. And the combination of the resveratrol and the turmeric together creates a synergy that also increases the support for a healthy inflammatory response tenfold. So you get the combination of a significant increase in the benefit of the liquid emulsified forms of both of those, and then you get the synergy of the two of them and how they work together. So in retrospect, when you're looking at an entire protocol for somebody who has got a deep chronic issue with their AMPK pathway that's been dealing with this for well over a decade, they're typically using the glycine, the enterovite, either the glycoberine or the glycoberine MX, also a krill oil for an omega-3, and then the combination also of the resveratrol and turmeric to help deal with the inflammatory response. But as I said earlier, unless I know somebody is in that deep and dark of a place that they've been dealing with this AMPK pathway issue for a number of years, and usually a decade or longer, I'll usually start slow. Start with the glycine and the enterovite and work from there based on how you're feeling and progressing. Because if you start with less and then you recognize that, hey, my energy is better after meals, you recognize that, well, my mind seems a little bit sharper, you recognize that your cravings aren't quite the same, well, then you're going down the right direction. So that first part of this is what you could do from a supplement perspective. Now, beyond that, there's more than you can do than just supplements. One thing that you can actually do that's very, very helpful is, number one is vigorous exercise. So when I'm talking about vigorous exercise, I'm not talking about like running a marathon or being in a triathlon. I'm talking about more of what we would consider burst training, where you're getting up your heart rate extremely high by doing something to an extreme of how fast and how aggressive you could do it. But you do that for about 30 seconds and then let your heart rate come back down. And then you can do that for up to a 20-minute period. And it's a very intense, vigorous workout that is supportive for the AMPK pathway. It's supportive for creating a healthy inflammatory response. It's supportive for your brain and your hormonal system, and it's supportive for the goals that you're trying to reach. Now, what that could look like, let's say as an example, if you had a treadmill and you got on the treadmill and you sprinted for 30 seconds, so literally as fast as you could possibly run. And then once you hit that 30-second mark, you slow it down to maybe 2 or 2.5 miles an hour, where you're just casually walking. And you walk like that for about 2 minutes, let the heart rate come back down. Then you hit it back up to whatever that speed is for sprinting for you. It might be 6 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour, 8 miles an hour. Depends on what shape and whether you've been running or not already. So that's just an example of what you can do as far as that vigorous exercise. Now, when I did mention you do 30 seconds of intensity, high intensity, then 2 minutes, so 120 seconds of lower casual movement. Now, The maximum I would want you to do the whole of this would be for 20 minutes, maybe 3 times a week. Now, if you're new to this type of exercise or you haven't exercised in some time, you just start slow. You start with doing one cycle of 30 minutes of high intense exercise, followed by just 2 minutes of maybe walking in place. That could be doing jumping jacks as fast as humanly possible for yourself for 30 seconds, and then just walking in place. And you work up to doing more. Don't start with 20 minutes, and please be sure that you're in shape to be able to do that before you get too aggressive with your exercise. Now, the other positive way that you can address this as well, and if you've been a part of the membership for some time, you've heard me talk about the ketogenic diet, ketosis, and even more specifically Depke, which is personalized keto. This is another significant way that you can help shift the AMPK pathway. When most people talk about the keto diet, their main focus is on weight loss, which is obviously a major advantage of the ketogenic diet. But what most people don't realize is that the ketogenic diet is a significant impact on helping you regulate blood sugar and to help with what's called insulin sensitivity. So to be able to properly utilize insulin to remove the glucose from your blood to maintain a normalized blood sugar level. Other aspects of this too that are very supportive down this pathway is the ketogenic diet is very supportive for mitochondria health. Mitochondria health is essential for about 96% of your body's energy production. And it's also very important for those high energy needs of the body. So this can be tied directly into your kidneys, your liver, your heart, and then also your brain. So the ketogenic diet plays a big role in helping you lose the weight, gain the energy, take care of those high energy needs of the body, also regulating your blood sugar better and actually better utilizing insulin in your body. So the combination, if what I've been talking about last week and this week is something that resonates with you, where you recognize some of the symptoms I've talked about or some of the body signs that I've discussed, and perhaps you're recognizing some of those other symptoms tied into how your brain is working, or challenges in your gut, or with your hormonal system, or the raise in leptin, which is driving cravings on a consistent basis for you. Incorporate the combination of at least a low level of this vigorous exercise, the Depke, which is the personalized keto, and then at least start moving into, if this is an issue for you, moving into starting at least with the glycine and the enterovite. And again, number one, the glycine is used to help you regulate blood sugar better. And then also the enterovite is to help repair the gut lining. Now, the other aspect you want to pay attention to as well, because even if you're not doing the ketogenic diet, you can still get some benefits down this pathway with the combination of the supplementation and just making sure that when you're eating meals, if you're still getting significantly tired with after meals, start paying attention to how many carbohydrates you're eating at your meal time, and just start lowering the carb content down until you notice that there's some changes. And one of the things that I want to bring up as well is if you're moving into using berberine or the glycoberine active, if you're taking too much of this for your body, you can drop your blood sugar too low. And if you're taking too much, you typically will be craving sugar because the blood sugar is going to be too low. I don't run into that problem with my clients, because they're being guided as to how to use the supplement protocol. But if you're doing this on your own, I wanted to bring that up, because if you're taking berberine and that's an issue for you and having that craving, know that you just might be doing a little bit too much too aggressively for yourself. And the other thing I want to share in regard to berberine as well is berberine plays a role with mitochondria as well. Like, berberine is fantastic for helping your body to support blood sugar regulation. and it is also very beneficial for cleaning out what I would call dirty mitochondria. And dirty mitochondria, as sometimes they'll refer to it as it's like cellular acidity, basically. But when you're taking berberine, if you take too much, you could clean out the mitochondria too quickly. And it actually, if you take too much berberine, you could also notice that you'll have a very loose stool and diarrhea, maybe through a good portion of the day after taking too aggressive a dose of berberine. So these are some of the reasons why the glycoberine active versus the glycoberine MX would be used if your body just can't handle cleaning out that mitochondria too aggressively. So those are all the things to really pay attention to. And so what I want to do with this then as well is now that I've done discussing the review of the AMPK pathway, as well as discussing the different supplements that can be used down this avenue, as well as some of the different lifestyle tips and choices that you can make that would be different. This is a great opportunity. If you have any questions, number one, you can actually put your question in the chat box, which I'll take a check and see if there's any in there right now, which there are not. And if you wanted to ask a question or make a comment live, just put your cursor right over the video and you'll see the little microphone on the lower left-hand side of the video will pop up, and you can unmute yourself for any question or comment you may have. And if I don't have any live, I do know that a lot of the Depke Wellness members watch the replays of these. So please, as you've been going through this video, because between part 1 and part 2, there's quite a bit of information that you've got on here. So if you have any questions or comments about what we talked about last week with the whole of the AMPK pathway, or with this week with more of the body signs, the symptoms and solutions that could be provided, please be sure to email me back with email where you were watching this link from, so I can help you understand what this is all about and how, if you are the person dealing with dysfunctional AMPK pathway, how you can actually overcome this and get really the health, the energy, and the life that you not only desire, but more importantly, the life, the health, and everything that you really truly deserve. So I look forward to answering any questions that you have online. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.